for that. We've got a nice lineup for us for the rest of the afternoon. From 1 to 1:25, we're going to talk about a proactive approach with biological control strategies. 1:30 to 2 o'clock, we're going to have a grower talk to us about their experience about using banker plants for aphid control. Then at 2 o'clock, looking at pesticides and wondering if they're ever compatible with a biological control program. 2:30 to 3 o'clock, the fundamentals of using biological controls for fungal and bacterial diseases. And finally, at the very end, at 3 o'clock, we'll go over a case study of using biological controls for disease control in greenhouse crops. If you haven't already, you can look into the materials tab of your GoToTraining control panel. You will find the PDFs of all the different PowerPoints that the presenters are using today. Those are there for you to download, to use, to take notes on, as well as have for your files in the future. If you have missed something today, or you couldn't, you know somebody who couldn't be on the webinar today, we are recording this webinar, and I'll have that sliced up and broken up by speaker, and have that posted on our e-GRO website under webinars. Probably within the next 10 to 14 days, we'll have that up there. The PDFs also will be available there for you, the growers, to download and take notes on. Without any further delay, do know that you can be typing in questions in the chat box of the GoToTraining control panel. I will moderate those questions as best I can at the end of each session. So if you have a question that you think of and you don't want to forget it, go ahead and type that in, and I will refer to it when our speaker is done. Our next speaker is Ron Valentin from Syngenta. He is going to be talking about the importance of a proactive approach with a biological control strategy. So just be patient with me here as I turn this over to Ron. Ron, I'm going to make you the presenter. So there you go. You should have control of the PowerPoint now. And I will now unmute you. There you go, Ron. Can you talk in your microphone?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Sounds great. Sounds great.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Brian and Joyce, for inviting me to be part of this webinar today. Hope everybody had a good lunch. And what I'm going to be talking about is why it's so important to be proactive with a biological control strategy. If you look at biological control, it's we've heard this morning already a little bit about pest identification, but I think it's also very important to know what life cycles of these target pest problems are. And thinking about life cycles, not only the life cycle, but also fecundity, how many eggs are these producing, because this all has an effect on the development of your pest problems. What is also important to know if you are working with biological control is to understand or have an understanding where the biological control agents are actually affecting the target pest. Obviously, with insects, there's eggs and larvae and pupa and adults, and this is kind of for quite a few of the pest problems that we're dealing with. So we need to understand where the different BCAs are affecting the life cycle of the target pest. What is also important to know is that thresholds in ornamentals are often different from vegetable production. Just as an example, a poinsettia plant that is produced with biological control, whitefly levels are much lower as far as acceptance goes than in, for example, a tomato crop. A tomato crop with 5 or 10 or even more adults per plant is not really a big issue because it will not affect production. But a poinsettia plant that has 10 plus white flies on it is a different story. What is also important is to start the crop clean, and that has actually almost like a double meaning. We obviously would like to see cuttings come in that have very low levels or non-existing levels of pest problems. But what we have learned over the years is that zero tolerance is almost impossible or not possible to achieve. However, in order to do so, often we do see that there are residues on these cuttings that are coming in through the door, and we also have to realize that some of these residues potentially could have a negative effect on establishment of BCAs, of biological control agents. So there's a big role of the cutting production and propagation that's a challenge to achieve a clean plant. For growers, obviously, it's important to inspect plants when they arrive. That's very important. But also communication, and I say the good and the bad, is very important between growers and their suppliers. It's better to know upfront what you're dealing with, not only for growers that are working with biological control, but even for growers that are still on a traditional spray program. It would be very helpful if there was some information, historical information, what has happened on the stock plants as far as categories of pesticides that have been used. BCAs is a system approach. That's also very important. I see often in the field that somebody is really focused on trying to control their main pest problem, and often if people switch to biological control, that's the focus. But we can't forget that if we tackle, for example, thrips, that there's other pest problems that could stick up their head too, and we need to be able to deal with those too. And even for those pest problems, a proactive approach is important. I always say biological control is preventing problems and not trying to fix them. And to illustrate this a little bit more, I'd like to talk a little bit on one of the main pest problems on a global level, thrips. And I think in mid-2000, 2006, thrips control became a lot more difficult when there were some issues with resistance development for certain pesticides, and that really drove the ornamental industry on a global level to look at other alternatives. So I have here some pictures, not only from a Gerbera flower that you see on the right-hand side that is completely scarred up, but also a cucumber crop on the left-hand side that is affected by thrips control. And obviously, if you're talking about these kind of levels, it's very hard to control that. You see a little cucumber there that is in development that is curled. That's one of the damaging damage from thrips on cucumbers. The thrips will feed on a very, very small cucumber in the tip of the plants and the tip of the shoots, and then that cell tissue is starting to stretch, and instead of having a straight long English cucumber, they all curl up. On the left-hand side, you see a rose crop that has been affected by echinothrips, which is more a thrips that is affecting the leaves. I've seen that in poinsettias as well, and it can get as bad as defoliaging the plant from the bottom up. This is a thrips that we typically find more lower in the plant canopy. And on the right-hand side, you see a peppers that are severely affected by TSWV, one of the viruses that can be vectored by thrips. So a little bit of background information on thrips. They're small insects, and Nancy already mentioned quite a few of the thrips species that are out there. The most common one that is found globally is Frankliniella occidentalis, or western flower thrips. That's the thrips that we see in greenhouses all around the globe. There are a couple of other thrips species, Thrips tabasi. Echinothrips we see sticking up its head here and there, especially in poinsettias. We've seen kind of an increasing level over the last few years. And also chili thrip, which is much smaller than western flower thrips. It's about 1/3 of the size of western flower thrips. So often if you see thrips on the sticky cards, it is hard to do a proper ID. Thrips ID is very, very difficult, but there are, well, in North America, there are over 100 different thrip species, so not every thrips is a thrips that actually affects greenhouse crops. It's also important to know where these thrips are on the plant. I mentioned that echinothrips we often see more in the bottom part of the plant and working its way up. The other thing is that echinothrips is often more found in spots in the greenhouse. I've seen that again in poinsettias where there's a spot of 50 or 100 square foot, and you go one bay over and you can't find them. So mobility on these echinothrips is a little bit limited. The other thing with echinothrips is that the life cycle takes place completely on the plant. So with western flower thrips, at the end of the second larval stage, they drop to the floor and pupate in the soil or underneath the benches, where echinothrips actually pupates on the plant. I'm going to talk a little bit about the life cycle in the next few slides, but also if you look at damage, both the larvae and the adults can do damage. Although often in flowering crops, if western flower thrips has pollen available, that's something that they do like to feed on as well. And then there's the virus transmission that I'd like to highlight a little bit more as well. So if we look at development of thrips, if we start off with one female thrips, and these numbers are actually coming from cucumbers, and long English cucumbers do not produce pollen, so this picture could be very different for a crop, for instance, like potted gerbera or dahlias, who are which produce pollen, and that gives a completely different picture. But on cucumbers, one female thrips in about 30 days, which is at these kind of temperatures almost 2 generations later. We have about 90 thrips, and another 30 days later, we talk about 5,800 thrips. So you can see that the development of thrips can go quite rapidly. Now, in order to successfully control thrips with biological control, the key is to try to start very early on. Once we start talking about the life cycle, that will probably become a little bit more clear. And that's why I mentioned here, start here early on could mean success. But it does happen in the spring that people call for help, and we're talking about March, where thrips levels are already developed, and at that point it's very hard to jump on the bandwagon with biological control because of where the different BCAs are actually affecting the life cycle of thrips. So that's where I mentioned too late, which often leads to disappointments, and the last thing we want to hear is that I tried biological control and unfortunately it didn't work. So if we look at the life cycle of thrips, the female thrips is actually penetrating the eggs in the cell tissue, in the leaf tissue, and at 68 Fahrenheit, that egg stage is almost 6 days, and after that, out of that egg crawls a larva that is actually exposed. That this larva is either on the leaves or in the flowers, and there's actually 2 larval stages that are approximately 3 days each. And at the end of the second larval stage, that thrips drops, and the pupa of western flower thrips is in the soil, which takes approximately also 6 days. So at 68 Fahrenheit, from egg to adult is approximately 18 days. And this is kind of the kicker with thrips. Then we get the adult that is on the plant, so it's exposed again. But adult thrips can live up to 60 days. which is quite long for an insect. If you compare that with whitefly, whitefly lives approximately 2 weeks, maximum 2.5 weeks as an adult. So temperature does have a an effect on development. You see here at 86 Fahrenheit that it's basically cut in half. So at 86 is 3 days as an egg, 2 times 1.5 day as a larva, and then 3 days as a pupa, making it going quite a bit faster. So from 68 Fahrenheit to 18 days to 86 Fahrenheit, which is about 9 days from egg to new adult. Their lifespan also decreases a little bit, but nevertheless, the development from thrips does speed up in the spring when temperatures go up. Now, if we look at where different biocontrol agents actually affect the life cycle of thrips, one of the main biocontrol agents used for thrips control is Amblyseius cucumeris. And I say here Amblyseius species because there's also Amblyseius Czarsky. But what we have to realize is that those little predatory mites that Stenton also talked about in his presentation, these little predatory mites only feed on L1, larval stage 1, which at 68 Fahrenheit is approximately a 3-day window of opportunity. Once that larva has gone past that point of 3 days, that larva has now become too big for Amblyseius to overcome. It is true that some of those second larval stages will be attacked by Amblyseius, but the percentage is not enough to actually make sense and add to control. So at the point of entry, when you bring cuttings in or when you start your crop, the message here is don't start to think about implementing Amblyseius cucumeris 3 or 4 weeks after planting, because you potentially could have missed a couple of generations of thrips, which reduces the chances of having a successful program. So especially when Amblyseius, it's really important to try to start as early as you can. As an example, if you start some hanging baskets, the way to think is not in the sense of I have planted 5,000 baskets this week. Let's order some Amblyseius cucumeris mini sachets next week. The ideal situation would be to place those sachets on the basket and at point of planting. I also mentioned aureus insidiosus here and Steinernema feltiae. Aureus insidiosus is a predatory bug that affects thrips. I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. And Steinernema is also a nematode that can affect thrips larvae. At the end of that second larval stage, thrips drops to the soil, to the floor, where it pupates. And often for fungus net control, growers introduce hypoaspis and atheta. These two, the first one is a predatory mite, the other one is a rove beetle. They live in the soil and they are considered generalist predators. So we know from work that was done up in Canada that if you have these two predators established in your media where the thrips pupates, you can catch approximately 40% of your pupa. So that's why it's considered a side effect. And then as far as the adults go, aureus insidiosus is really the only macrobiological that can actually affect adult thrips. And it's quite aggressive. It can kill up to 80 thrips per day from research in Europe, even though it only feeds on a couple. They are extremely aggressive. They go into a flower and keep attacking thrips, poking a hole in their body, and those adult thrips will not survive. One thing that needs to be said too about thrips, I mentioned that the earlier slide with that development of thrips and the numbers was done on cucumber, and cucumber the long English cucumber varieties do not produce pollen. But what we know is that the fecundity of thrips can be different from crop to crop, especially in things like gerbera and dahlia, and also in peppers. If thrips has pollen available, the egg laying capacity can go from approximately 4 to 5 eggs per female per day to approximately 15 eggs per female per day. So needless to say that when spring crops start to flower in the end of February or sometime in March, that can increase the amount of thrips quite rapidly. Also, in conjunction with the temperatures going up, things can go haywire pretty quickly. A little bit about virus. Often we hear that people say that once you are dealing with virus, your tolerance on thrips is 0. What we do have to realize with the thrips is that an adult thrips that does not carry the virus can also not transmit the virus, and also will not be able to still pick up the virus to transmit it to another plant. In other words, if you had 2 plants and you had a thrips that does not carry the virus, and the one plant is sick and the other plant is healthy, if that adult thrips feeds on the plant that has been infected with TSWV, it cannot transmit that TSWV to the healthy plant. In order to do so, that adult thrips needs to lay eggs on that plant. From those eggs, you will get larvae, and it's actually the larva, the first instar larva, that actually acquires the virus. That larva needs to complete its larval stages and then go through the pupal stage, and then that adult that comes back carries the virus in its system, and that adult thrips will be able to transmit the virus throughout its life. The key here is that if you look at biological control, the main biological control that is used for thrips control are the predatory mites Amblyseius cucumeris and Amblyseius ersky, which primarily feed on the first larval stage of thrips. So in other words, if you have good control of your thrips by these Amblyseius mites, you should not have any thrips getting past that point and taking the risk of having more virus transmission. So here's a number of products that are out there for thrips control. Amblyseius cucumeris is probably the most commonly used and also the most cost-effective predatory mite for thrips. I will highlight these a little bit one by one, but there's aureus and hypoaspis, atheta, steinernema, and Amblyseius ersky. Oops. Amblyseius cucumeris is a small predatory mite. It feeds on the first larval stage of thrips. It starts to be active at lower temperatures. The current strain is no longer diapausing. A long time ago, a researcher in Europe found a strain that is non-diapausing in New Zealand. That's about 20 years ago, and since then we are dealing with Amblyseius cucumeris that is no longer diapausing. It also has an effect on broad mites. Again, also with broad mites, it's very important to start early and have Amblyseius established before broad mites really can become a problem. One of the interesting things is that Suzanne mentioned it about pollen. Amblyseius cucumeris and Amblyseius ersky can both establish themselves really well on pollen, which is also, especially in crops like bell peppers as a vegetable crop, they once released, they can establish quite well. About 20 years ago, also the breeding systems became available. That actually all started with a little flower flask, little anthurium flask that was filled with breeder material, and that has led to the development of breeder sachets that are readily available right now. One of the newer developments with the sachets is that is the development of mini sachets, which has been primarily focused on the hanging basket situation, where you actually can have a sachet on every single basket, which is quite different from the vegetable growers. Like if you look at cucumbers and pepper crops where there's full plant contact, they typically use one sachet every 3 plants, and the mites can actually walk from one plant to the next. But these larger sachets are not really suitable for ornamental situations like hanging baskets, because the mites will simply not go up the hanger over the structure to the next basket. So that led to the development of these mini sachets. Here's a couple of examples. You see a sachet hanging on the basket. What is in that sachet is bran that has been inoculated with a fungus, and there's some other things, some other ingredients in there too. That is a food source for Tyrophagus mites, prey mites, and that in return is also a food source for the Amblysia. So it's literally a little culture that reproduces for approximately 6, 7, sometimes 8 weeks. In the summer, it can be a little shorter when temperatures are really high, where it's typically around 4 to 5 weeks. One practical tip with these sachets is to, if you like to see what is coming out of these sachets, it's sometimes really hard to determine quality because these mites are so small, is to actually take one of these sachets and actually place it on a yellow sticky card, and then make sure you do it with the hole on the outside, obviously, because otherwise you would block them. But then in the weeks after, you will start to see a shade around the sachet on the sticky card of mites that have walked out of the sachet. It's kind of a quick and dirty quality control check that you can do. Lesya Czarsky is a mite that is very similar to Amblysia cucumbers. The only thing is that it likes warmer temperatures. It originates from Israel and really prefers warmer temperatures. The added benefit of Czarsky really kicks in when you get to temperatures that are well in the 80s and 90s. And also, one of the added benefits is that it actually also feeds on whitefly eggs. So especially in crops that are both thrips and whitefly susceptible, this really can help. Here we see aureus. I mentioned they can kill up to 80 thrips per day. They can also establish and feed on pollen, but what we have to realize with aureus is that they do have diapause, so they are diapause sensitive, and that time period basically goes from approximately October 20th to February 20th. If you want to try to get them established earlier, you will need to lengthen your days to approximately 12 hours. There are growers that are doing this with the help of banker plants, especially the purple flash pepper. And in the picture here in the left-hand corner, you see a grower that has these banker plants hanging up in the greenhouse. I know Rich Denzel will be talking more about banker plants, but with the pepper banker plants, you have to think in the order of 80 to 100 bell pepper or purple flash peppers per acre. One of the things with aureus is that they also feed on other things. They are considered generalist predators, and especially when the population is established, you often see them feeding on spider mite and moth eggs. Here we see a couple of pictures. The left-hand picture is a cucumber flower where you can actually see the aureus feeding on a thrips, and the right-hand side picture is a gerbera flower with 2 adult aureus in it. Here we see Steinonema, the nematodes. The bottom picture, we see a dip of chrysanthemum cuttings that is becoming more and more popular, of actually dipping cuttings into a solution, rooted as well as unrooted cuttings. What we have to realize that with this product, and Stanton also talked about Botanigard, Bovaria bassiana, that contact with the target insect is really important. So there's no better way of getting contact than submerging into a solution. Again, take-home messages. I think what is really important is that you make a plan for your operation and for your crops, but it is really critical to try to start your biological control as early as possible. Planning in that part is really important, especially if you also look at ordering your biologicals and planning that out. It's really a proactive approach. It's really kind of an insurance to increase your success rate. Understanding the life cycle of both your pest and BCA really helps to motivate and to understand why certain things need to happen the way that they are recommended. It is really a systems approach. Do not let the efforts on, for example, thrips being torpedoed by a mite outbreak or an aphid outbreak, and you need to go in multiple times with certain insecticides to control these other pest problems. Communication is really important with your plant material suppliers, but also with specialists and other growers who have made the switch before you did to get an understanding. That communication really helps to understand what leads to successful programs. Also, communication with your biological control supplier is really critical to make sure that you get these sachets or other biocontrol agents in time at your facility. And last but not least, which will lead to one of the next speakers, consider banker plants as part of your strategy. In a way, if you look at banker plants, it is nothing different than those breeding sachets. It is an open breeding system of your BCAs to increase your success rate of biological control. Again, biological control is really trying to prevent problems and not fixing them. And with this, I'd like to hand it over again to Brian.
Okay, Ron. We have time for just one or two questions where we need to switch over pretty soon. But a question about does city water and therefore the chlorine in city water affect nematodes?
No, that is typically not. The levels that are in there are typically not a problem.
Okay. And then Marjorie Daughtry just wanted to make a comment about dipping cuttings into a suspension of nematodes. You could run the risk of spreading diseases, especially bacterial diseases. So just if you have plants that are really susceptible to certain diseases, doing a dip like that might be of concern.
Yep. Yeah, that is definitely something that needs to be taken into consideration.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna. Well, I think we have one more time for one more question on the thrips life cycle slide. Let's see. It said that there's something about some side effects below the atheta.
Yeah, we call that a side effect because the hypoaspis and atheta alone will not be able to control thrips. The control that has been found with those two is about 40% of the pupa. So it's kind of a side effect of these two on thrips control. I would not recommend to do thrips control just with amblyopsis or just with hypoaspis or atheta. It is a part of the approach.
Okay, I think that's all the time we have for questions right now. I do have a question for all of you. I'll throw it up there for you. Please indicate if you would like to have more information from Syngenta on how to start or maintain a biological program in your greenhouse or nursery. Take a couple moments to check in your answer there. As with the question before that I asked, if you do want information from Syngenta, we will forward on that information to them so they can contact you. We will not share your information with Syngenta if you select no. So we do want to respect your privacy. So take another few seconds to type that in. All right, thank you very much, everybody. Right now, I'm going to throw this back over to our next speaker. Just need to, there's Rich. Okay, now let me take care of the audio here. Okay, Rich, you should have control of the sound.